This week's Friday tip is all about styling your photos. It's not just for people who sell products. If you use social media to share information about what goes on behind the scenes in your business, if you're a service provider, whether you cut hair or you sort of do coaching or whatever, showing your tools of your trade and what you do is great. But getting those photos to look appealing is a bit of a skill. Sometimes it looks, when you look on Instagram, that people have just thrown a few things on the table and, oh gosh, it looks wonderful. But there's usually a lot of thought that's gone behind it. So today I'm going to share with you a few tips and hints about that. So these apply whether you're going to do your own photos or whether you're going to get somebody like me, a professional photographer, in to come and do it for you. Step number one is to, and I always say this, I know it's a bit of a sort of broken record, is think about your ideal client. What photos or what images are going to appeal to them? And because what appeals to a teenager is probably very different to what appeals to somebody sort of my age or older. So you need to really think about who your target market is and who your ideal client is. Now, hopefully, if you've done any marketing for your business, you've got that all sorted anyway, so you've got a good idea of that. If you haven't, then do Google ideal client avatars, and they will give you some ideas on what sorts of things you need to think about to draw up a picture of your ideal client. But I won't go into that in great detail today, because today is about product photography. So once you work out who your target market is, now you've got carte blanche to go onto Pinterest and actually go and find some pictures that you absolutely love and that you think your ideal client will love too. Spend half an hour or so going through and having a look for things that you really like. You might have collected a sort of a selection of photos like this already. It's also important to think about ones that you don't really gel with. You think, oh no, that's totally against what I do. So it might be worth having two Pinterest boards, one for those that you think are appropriate and those that you really don't like and want to avoid. And that certainly helps. I encourage my clients to do that, because that gives me a good visual idea of what they actually want to achieve. So whether you're doing it for yourself or you're working with a professional, if you've got a clear idea of what you want to achieve, that is great. Once you've put together a Pinterest board of things you like and you don't like, you will see some common elements. So there might be particular styles of how things are photographed, whether you like flat lays, whether everything's photographed above, or you prefer a different style of photo. Look for common elements that you particularly like, and hopefully that'll give you some clues as to what you're aiming for. The other thing you need to think about, if you're selling products, so you're going to want to submit to websites like Not on the High Street, for instance. They protect their brand. They're very clear about what they like and what they don't like about photos. You can't just stick any old photos on sites like that. They will have clear, if they're not written guidelines, there will be a definite theme to how they like things presented. So it's worth having a look at the guidelines on the website, and also looking at what's there already with people who are already selling stuff on those sorts of websites. So how do they style it? So once you've got an idea about the style of photos that you like, who your target market is, then you can start doing the fun bit, which is go out and source some props. As a photographer, I do have a stack of props, and sometimes people say, oh, can I use your stuff? And that's fine. But if you want a unique look to your pictures, it is worth making some effort getting some props of your own. Because if you've got a consistency in style, I'm not saying you have to use the same pair of scissors or whatever it is in every single shot, but if you've got some consistency of style in your photos, people are going to start recognising them as yours before they even see, where they've seen them. It's particularly in a social media stream where you're scrolling through loads of people's output. If it stands out as your photo and they like your stuff, they're going to go to it. So it's worth investing in some props that are unique to you. So what should you look for when you're sourcing props? Well, first off, think about how they sit with your product or whatever it is you're photographing. Sometimes props can distract from what you're photographing. There's one particular example. I did some photos for a lady who did jewellery stuff. She bought some lovely wrapping paper which had beautiful shiny gold dots on it. When you were looking at the pictures, you were looking at the dots and her jewellery sort of disappeared against it. So while in theory it should have worked well, when we actually photographed it in 2 dimensions, it didn't work well at all. So we ditched that bit and used something else instead. So there is a bit of trial and error involved. And make sure the things that you use are on brand. I've seen people who do lovely bespoke stationery and they've photographed it and they've just used a cheap pen in the photograph and it really doesn't sit well with it. It's well worth investing in a slightly more expensive looking pen. When you're choosing items, watch out for stuff that distinctly belongs to a specific brand and logos as well, because certain brands guard their stuff religiously. So if you want to put a bottle of perfume in the background, there are certain perfume manufacturers who don't want to be seen to, I suppose, it sort of implies that they're endorsing you when they might not be. And there are certain brands that are very hot on that and will jump on you if they find their stuff used in a photo that's not just about them. So do be careful with that. So you want sort of generic things really, rather than recognisable patterns and recognisable products and logos that are specific to a brand that's not associated with you. Obviously, if you're photographing stuff because you're a reseller for that brand, that's a different kettle of fish. But again, do check with them whether there's any sort of rules on how they like their products shown. In these days with social media, it should be less of an issue, but they might have certain things. You don't want to invest, particularly if you're investing in photos that you're going to use on printed marketing materials that you know, spending hard cash on. You don't want to find out that they say, no, you can't use that, and you have to throw a load of stuff away. So it's worth checking that. Telling the story. We talked about using props that complement things. Well, if you sell, say you sell scented products like candles or aromatherapy stuff, how does anybody know what that smells like other than what you've told them in the text? So think about using some of the ingredients that go into the scents, for example, in your photo, like if you're using lavender, a sprig of lavender, those sorts of things, because that helps tell the story visually about what your product is. Not just with scented stuff, with food and so on. Anything where they need a bit of extra information that a two-dimensional photo doesn't tell, try and think whether there are any props that you can use that help that. And while we're talking about using things like flowers in your photos, that's a great idea, but make sure they're absolutely spot on. You don't want something that looks a bit off. So, you know, if you're using cut flowers, keep them in a vase just before you're due to use them so they look nice and fresh and bright. If you're using fruit and vegetables, make sure they're spot on, there's no bruises or marks on them, so that they look like really good quality stuff. Otherwise it looks a bit odd, and you can Photoshop little bits out of, but you know, if it's past its best and it looks like it's past its best, it's not going to show off your product to its best thing. So with fresh fruit and flowers, make sure you get I'd always buy extra bits so you can, you know, work what piece of fruit or what flower works best with your particular layout. So that's choosing the actual props. The final factor is what you have as a background. I've touched on this briefly when I talked about the sort of wrapping paper and the rough textures and so on. But again, the background needs to be in keeping. I'd say if you've got really shiny jewellery, having a sort of textured background can really work well. But again, the background shouldn't distract from what you're photographing. Sometimes you just have to try it out and look at it in 2 dimensions afterwards to see, does this work or doesn't it? So yes, have some rough hewn wood against your nice shiny jewellery, particularly if your jewellery is based on sort of nature designs and so on. But if it's too rough and distracting, people would be looking at that rather than actually your piece of jewellery. So it's the same with any photography really. Once you've taken the photo, have a good look at it in 2 dimensions and work out where your eye is travelling around the photo. What are you drawn to look at? And if it isn't the product or the tool of the trade or whatever it is you're showing and it's distracted with something else, then you need to rethink about the layout or what items you include. The final thing about backgrounds is reflective backgrounds can be quite good, particularly if you're, say, photographing bottles or something, and if you stand them on you can get pieces of acrylic, so they're not very reflective, but it's reflective enough to have a bit of a sort of shadow in the picture. They just make it more interesting and more 3-dimensional. But the one thing you have to watch out with reflective backgrounds, particularly if you're doing flat lays where you're photographing from overhead, is you don't want to see you and your camera in the picture, and that can be actually quite tricky to sort of deal with. So watch out for things that are really reflective, because you're giving yourself an extra headache as to what actually you can see in the picture, and all sorts of things reflected in it. There's all sorts of things you can use as backgrounds, you know, everything from card to paper, even wrapping paper and wallpaper, as long as you avoid those sort of patented designs and so on. If you're watching this on the replay and you think, oh, you didn't cover that, by all means leave a comment and I will check them later and get back to you. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for looking in, and yeah, I'll see you again soon.